Mike Israetel says seated calf raises are overrated. I strongly disagree. In fact, skipping them might be why your calves still suck.
So basically what you're saying, Daniel, is we have a situation where with a standing calf raise, you get it all. And with a seated calf raise, you get the same growth for the soleus, but almost no growth for the gastro. So it begs the question of why the you would ever do a seated calf raise.
In this video, I'll break down why seated raises are actually critical for full calf development and why you've been led astray. Once again, I'm on hand to break down the myths and misinformation by some of these science-based influences. I'm Faz. I've coached hundreds of naturals, and one thing's clear: if you ignore Soleus work, you're leaving calf gains on the table. And you know what? This isn't just theory either. Like, I've seen seated raises make a visible difference in mine and my clients' physiques, and my calves, quite frankly, are freaking massive. So stick around, because at the end, I'm going to show you the exact setup that I use for seated calf raises. Also, a technique that I use to make sure that I am actually stimulating the muscle instead of just bouncing the weight around. So without further ado, let's move on to point one. Now, the study in question was the Kinoshita study. In this 12-week study, untrained participants trained one leg with standing raises and the other with seated. The standing leg saw significantly more gastroc growth, up to about 12%. The seated leg barely grew anything. That is where people have now taken this and misinterpreted as saying the seated raise is pointless altogether. But here's the twist. That only tells us what happens in beginners. These were untrained lifters. Why? Because stretch gains like this are often the result of sarcomerogenesis. That is adding sarcomeres in series, not actual hypertrophy. In fact, if you were to ask sarcomerogenesis experts, they don't consider sarcomerogenesis to be hypertrophy at all. It's simply an adaptation that occurs in beginners. It does not occur in people like you or me at all. That mechanism drops off real fast. Trained lifters usually need more tension and loading, not just position, all the stuff that I've talked about in this channel. So just from that first point, we can see a big strike against using this study to throw out the seated raise altogether. And I'm going to carry on with 4 more points to emphasize what I'm saying. Now, point 2 is that the soleus is the calf's foundation. The soleus isn't just a helper, it's the base, right? MRI data shows it makes up 60 to 70% of total calf mass. Fukunaga in 92 and Kamakami in 98 showed this. It's this dense, slow twitch muscle sitting underneath the gastroc, and it only gets bias in a bent knee position. Standing raises train the soleus secondarily, which is true. Only seated raises give it priority. Like, I don't think it's a sensible idea not to bias 60 to 70% of your total calf mass. It makes sense to do seated calf raises. They work in tandem with the standing variations. And on that note, I want to give a quick shout out to the sponsor of this video, Boostcamp. Boostcamp is the official Fazlifts app. It is a workout app tracker with a difference. Difference is that on that app, you can actually access the programs from top coaches like myself, and you can run those routines directly on your phone. No putting in your routines yourself. You can actually get a routine by a top worldwide renowned coach and run that yourself. I have 3 free programs on there, as well as 2 paid programs. You can use my code Fazlifts for a free 2-week premium trial. Try it out. It's a great app, and it will replace the one that you're currently using, and it's way better because you have the expertise and the guidance of top coaches to give you the routines. Now, moving on to point 3, both the standing and the seated raises in this study did use full ROM, but only one of those used a full muscle length. So a lot of people are saying that the seated raise in that study used a poor range of motion. That's not true. That's a misunderstanding of the study, so that's also not valid. You know, if we're trying to critique things, we have to critique them with validity. Both exercises were done through a full dorsiflexion and plantar flexion, but there was one key difference. The standing calf raise trained the gastroc in a stretch position because the knee was extended. I mean, that makes sense. You know, if you're confused about what I'm saying here, because it took me a while to cotton onto this, when the leg is straight, the calf is going to be slightly more stretched. When the leg is bent, the calf will experience no stretch. And that goes back to the first point about sarcomerogenesis in beginners, which is why we didn't see much growth in the soleus or much growth at all after 12 weeks. In the seated raise, the knee was bent, and that shortened the gastroc. So this wasn't about ROM, it was about muscle length under load. Now, moving on to point 4, every successful bodybuilder still uses seated raises. Yeah, I know we're all evidence-based lifters here, but let's just zoom out for a second. If seated raises were truly ineffective, why are they still in the routines of Arnold, Dorian, Ronnie, Nick Walker, Derek Lunsford, Samson Dowder? These aren't random influencers on YouTube who can barely get into shape for a show after multiple years of trying. These are guys who've built world-class calves, and they all kept seated raises in. Now, listen, I'm not trying to do an appeal to authority here. I realize this, right? What I'm saying is this is not scientific proof, but this is a real world filter. The ineffective stuff typically tends to disappear. It gets shifted out. Seated raises haven't. They are still a staple in most bodybuilders' routines. I just think it's a damn shame that pretty much every evidence-based lifter that I speak to doesn't do seated calf raises for this reason, all for the sake of one misinterpreted 12-week study on beginners by an influencer who's out there to get your attention. It's madness. And that's exactly the kind of thing that I fight against on this channel. So now let's move on to point 5. The soleus adds shape like the brachialis adds peak. This was actually a very good analogy by a Ben Yanes. Check out his channel if you haven't done so already. Great guy, great content. Think of the soleus like the brachialis in your upper arm. It's not the star of the show, but it pushes everything outward. Having a large soleus for your gastro to sit on will make your calf look that much larger, wider from the side, the back, and the front. It adds the complete look. If you don't have a very well-developed soleus, you lose that, and your calves tend to look kind of top heavy and incomplete. You'll still have a very narrow shin, maybe with a bit of gastroc on top. That's not what we want. We really want to emphasize the soleus for that nice, wide, flaring look. And yeah, again, I will just provide a caveat. I do understand a lot of this is genetics, but listen, we all have genetic limitations. What I'm saying is we should be doing the work to maximize what we do have, what we were given, what we were born with. So don't ignore soleus work. It adds a lot of shape to your lower leg. It's absolutely crucial, in my opinion and my experience. So just to end, no, seated calf raises are not useless, but like any lift, they need to be done with intent, range, and progression. If you're training calves, you need both angles. You need straight leg for the gastroc stretch and bent knee for the soleus bias. So if you've been training calves wrong all this time, this next video will show you exactly how to build better legs without junk volume. The video is called "This is why your legs aren't growing and you're getting hurt." So go check that out now, and you can get a more complete guide on how to train legs, including your calves. All right, guys, take care. Speak soon.